Good morning, guys, and welcome back. And today's video is going to be Drill with Me and True Crime Corner. Today we are going now. Guys, I have been really trying to get. I've been trying to find different types of cases to talk about, and every time I pull one up that I think would be interesting, it's just, I don't know. And don't ask me why, but I always end up with the really, really weird ones, like serial killers and stuff. And believe me, it's not intentional. Don't ask me why, but I do. So we're just going to go with it. Now, I have one picked out for next week before we go any farther. I have one picked out for next week. And case was suggested to me by another creator, the Uncrafty Crafter, and I'm going to research it for her because she thought it would be a good idea for me to talk about it. So, Jenny, I will get into that next week. This one is this this one is about a man who, I have to say, I was looking up another case and his name came up in the case. It's a cold case. It's still open. And I just found it interesting that his name was brought up. And there really wasn't a whole lot of information. I mean, there is, but because the investigation into the cold case is still ongoing, there wasn't a whole lot of information in about that case. So I was like, okay, really weird. But I can understand why. I mean, it's open, it's still a cold case, and they're still trying to find the person that committed this crime, so forth. And he was one of the ones that said that he did this. So we're going to get into him. Now, the reason I say that he is put into this case is because of what he is. His name is Henry Lee Lucas, and he was born in 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia. He died on March 12th, 2001 in Huntsville, Texas for life imprisonment. And he is an American serial killer. And he committed crimes from 1960 to 1983. He's been convicted of murdering 11 women and condemned to death for the murder of Deborah Jackson. Although his sentence was commuted to life in prison in 1998. Now, he's been convicted for murdering 11 people, but his infamy rose after he confessed to more than 100 murders to the Texas Rangers and other law enforcement officials while he was in prison. So while he's in prison serving life, he confesses to all these other murders. Now, as I said earlier, the cold case that I was looking up, he confesses that he killed this person, but he wasn't in the state when the person was killed, or when the woman was killed. So they ruled him out. Now, his life, I'm going to get into his early life, and then we're just going to go on, after, to go on and get into this. I'm trying to do these chronologically so that you guys don't get confused and don't feel like I'm losing you when I'm going all over the place with these. Now, he was born in 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia. He lost an eye at age 10 after it had become infected from a fight that was with his brother. And, excuse me, and a friend later described him as a child who would often get attention by displaying frighteningly strange behavior. His mother, Viola, was a prostitute, and she would force him to watch her with her clients and make him cross dress in public. And purportedly, so that she could later pimp him out to men and women. So basically, he hasn't had a very good childhood to start off with. I mean, that's just, I'm sorry, a mother just doesn't do that to her child. That's just, downright sick. Uh, Eventually, his school teacher complained about the cross dressing, and a court order was put ahead and eventually put that to an end. So she was making him, do this all the time. And obviously, it occurred in school. So obviously, his mother has influenced him to the point that, she, makes him dress like, cross dress all the time and, does it at school. I mean, seriously? Okay. Now, in December of 1949, his alcoholic father died of hypothermia after going home drunk and collapsing outside during a blizzard. Shortly after, while in the 6th grade, Lucas drops out of school and then starts drifting around Virginia, and he's claimed to have committed his first murder in 1951 when he strangled 17-year-old Laura Burnsley after she refused his sexual advances. So this guy, doesn't have the greatest childhood. He has an alcoholic father, a mother who is, doing, what do you want to call it? I guess the better term for it is an escort. He was sentenced to excuse me. As with most of his confessions, he later retracted the claim. So he confessed a lot, but then, he retracted his claims. So, it makes you wonder, do they really believe him at all and anything? I mean, to me, that just, I don't know. To me, that just, I can understand, but why would you confess to something if you didn't do it? Not unless, like, it said earlier, he just wanted the recognition and to claim. I don't know. I mean, it sounds to me like this dude just, now in 1959 or 1954, excuse me, he was convicted on a dozen counts of burglary in and around Virginia and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And he escaped in 1957 and was recaptured 3 days later, and then was released in September of 1959. So this guy just basically doesn't know. And I'm not saying I pity him, but I can see, because he's got an alcoholic mother or father, and he's got a mother who is a lady of the night, so forth, or whatever you want to call her, and he doesn't know any different. Obviously, by now he's, drifting wherever, And I'm assuming he's drifting all across the state of Virginia. I don't know. So, he doesn't know any better. Now, in 1959, he ends up going to Michigan to live with his half sister. And Opal. And around this, excuse me, I need some coffee. Now, around this time, he's engaged to be married to a pen pal with a pen pal that he had corresponded with while he was in jail. Okay. So, now when his mother, excuse me, when his mother invited him for Christmas, she disapproved of his fiance and insisted that he move back to Virginia, but he refused. And they argued repeatedly about his upcoming wedding, nuptials, whatever you want to call it. So now, on January, now mind you, she's there at Christmas to visit him and his sister. She's already in Michigan visiting, them. In January 1960, after Christmas of 1959, he, he killed his mother during an argument regarding whether or not that he should return home to care for her as she grew older. Now, he claims that she struck him over the head with a broom, at which point he stabbed her in the neck. He then fled the scene. So, okay, first of all, if that is the case, now I don't know, what the state of Michigan, what their laws are regarding self-defense. I don't know anything about that. But my point is that if it wasn't self-defense and, because she hit you over the head or whatever, and you get into an argument or whatever kind of, whether or not it's physical, I would assume that he could have claimed self-defense. But again, I don't know, because I don't know anything about Michigan laws. So he flees. Now, he quotes stating, he ended up saying eventually, now this is his quote, "All I remember was slapping her alongside the neck. But after I did that, I saw her fall and decided to grab her. But she fell to the floor. And when I went to pick her back up, I realized she was dead. Then I noticed that I had my knife in my hand and that she had been cut." Okay. So what are they saying? He blacked out? Now, Opal had returned later, because apparently she wasn't there. She had returned later to discover that her mother was alive, but she was laying in a pool of blood. So she, called an ambulance, but it turned out that the ambulance was too late, and her mother had eventually ended up passing away. The official police report stated that she died of a heart attack precipitated by the assault. And he was arrested in Ohio on an outstanding Michigan warrant and was, he claimed that to have killed his mother in self-defense, but his claim was rejected. And he was sentenced to 20 to 40 years of imprisonment in Michigan. And after serving 10 years, he was released due to prison overcrowding in June of 1970. So obviously, they don't think, obviously, when he was arrested, they didn't believe that he did this in self defense because, number one, it just my opinion, if he did it in self defense, I don't think I would have ran away and, you know, just, I probably would have stayed to, face the music or whatever. I don't know. Um, but then again, with the way that he is and the way that his mind is probably, his mindset is, he probably just, who knows. So now in 1971, Lucas of, um, was then convicted of attempt attempting to kidnap three schoolgirls. While serving a 5-year sentence for the crime, he established a relationship with a family friend and single mother who had written to him. They got married on his release in 1975, but he left the marriage 2 years later after his stepdaughter accused him of sexually abusing her. Lucas began moving between various relatives. One got him a job in West Virginia, where he established a relationship that ended when his girlfriend's family confronted him about abuse. So this man just didn't know any better. Or he knew better and he just didn't care. So I don't know if it's because his parents were like that to each other. It doesn't really tell you. Okay. Then Lucas befriends a man by the name of Otis Toole and eventually ended up settling in Jacksonville, Florida, which he lived with Toole's parents and became close with his adolescent niece, Freda Becky Powell, who had a mild intellectual impairment and had escaped from a juvenile detention center. And now, mind you, during this time that he was living with his friend in Florida, he kind of had established a period of stability where he was working as a roofer, fixing neighbors' cars, and scavenging scrap. Now, Powell was put into a state shelter by the authorities after her mother and her grandmother died in 1982. And at that time, Lucas had convinced Powell to run away with him. And they lived on the road, eventually traveling to California, where the employer's wife, where an employer's wife asked them to work for her infirm mother, who was 82 years old, and her name was Kate Rich. Now, Kate Rich's family turned Lucas and Powell out, accusing them of failing to do their jobs and writing checks on Rich's account. So, okay. While hitchhiking, they were picked up by a minister from Stoneburg, Texas, a religious commune of a Stoneburg, Texas religious commune called the House of Prayer. Now, believing Lucas and the 15-year-old Powell were a married couple, he found Lucas a job. So, I'm assuming, to me, this sounds like, okay, he's going around telling everybody that him and this 15-year-old girl are married. So, after that, he finds a job as a roofer and allows the couple to stay in a small apartment on the commune. Now, Powell had become argumentative and eventually homesick for Florida. So, Lucas said that she had left at a truck stop in Bowie, Texas. Now, in 1983, June of 1983, he was arrested on charges of unlawful possession of a firearm by Texas Ranger Phil Ryan. Later, he confessed to the murders of Freda Powell and Kate Rich. In addition to confessing, Lucas led the police to the remains that were said to be Powell and Rich. And although the forensic evidence alone was inconclusive and the coroner stopped short of positively identifying either set of remains, his participation in the investigation would basically serve to boost his credibility in later confessions to other crimes. Now, Lucas denied any involvement, or later denied any involvement, but the consensus agrees that he did murder Freda Powell and Kate Rich. Now then, okay, now he's already in jail, 1983. Okay, now this is where he starts his false confession spree. Okay, so he has been transferred to a jail in Williamson County in Texas. Lucas reported that he was roughly treated by inmates and attempted suicide. Lucas claimed that the police stripped him naked and denied him cigarettes and bedding, held him in a cold cell, and tortured him, and did not allow him any contact with his attorney. Now, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about the prison system, but I would think that they, no matter what that, he has done, I would think they would at least, be respectful. But then again, I don't know. Like I said, every prison, who knows? So, in interviews with law enforcement, Lucas confessed to numerous additional unsolved killings, although it was thought that there was positive corroboration with 28 unsolved murders. So the Lucas Task Force, which was then established by the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety. Now, the task force officially cleared 213 murders, previously unsolved murders, as a result of the confessions. So, okay, does that mean he murdered 213 people? Or is this a false confession? So Lucas received preferential treatment rarely offered to convicts because of this. So because, he's getting, I don't know if he made a deal. I don't know, if, they're trying to, treat him, treat him a little bit nicer, just so that he'll tell them, about all these, murders that he committed or claims he committed. I have no clue. It just, being frequently taken to restaurants and cafes for his participation. Now, he was rarely handcuffed and often allowed to wander police stations and jails at will, and even knew codes for security doors. Now, I'm sorry. I don't care. Okay, I'm sorry. If I was a police officer and he's giving me all this, all these confessions about killing people, I sure as hell wouldn't let him walk around without being handcuffed and just walk around the police station and a jail at will, or even let him know codes to security doors. I mean, really, seriously, that right there is wrong, at least in my eyes. But so now, later attempts at determining Lucas's involvement in his confessed crimes gets complicated when it is discovered that Lucas was given access on the files of the cases that he was confessing to. So basically, he's been given access to the files, and he's just confessing to these killings. He's been reading all this stuff, and where he got the files from is a good question. But okay, who in their right mind would give him the files? There were suggestions that the interview tapes showed Lucas would read their reactions of those interviewing him and then altered what he was saying. So, in other words, if he got a reaction out of them that he wanted to get out of them, then he would alter what he was saying to make the confession, I guess, more believable. I really don't know. And I mean, but this guy was playing them like you wouldn't believe, making his confessions more consistent with facts known to law enforcement. The most serious allegation against investigators is that they had let Lucas read the case files on unsolved crimes and enabled him to come up with detailed confessions that were convincing enough, which made it virtually impossible to determine if he had been telling the truth. So that was kind of their fault. I mean, why would you do that? I mean, I get it. You want to know about, certain unsolved crimes and unsolved murders. But why would you give a man that has already killed his mother and killed his wife and an 80-some-year-old woman, and he's confessed to it? Why would you do this? This makes no sense to me whatsoever. That's just, I'm sorry. Why? Now, in 1983, he claimed to have killed an unidentified female, identified later as Michelle Busha, along Interstate 90 in Minnesota. Now, when he was questioned, he gave inconsistent details on the way he murdered her and was eliminated as a suspect. So he's, basically, if there's an unsolved murder, and this is what it sounds like to me. It sounds like to me, if there was an unsolved murder and, and it was a, female or whatever, and, he would just up and confess about it. I mean, seriously. Okay. And I think he was just doing that to try to get attention. And, well, they gave it to him, really, But I think they're kind of, seeing through the fact that, okay, you didn't do this. You're just doing this just because you want to get a reaction and you want, your little 5 minutes of fame, so forth, which to me, that just makes no sense. Then in 1984, he confessed to another murder of another identified girl who was discovered shot to death in a field in Caledonia, New York, in November of 1979. Now, the unidentified girl was referred to at the time as Caledonia Jane Doe. And investigators, however, found insufficient evidence to support his confession. So now, in 2015, over 35 years later, they did identify Donia Jane Doe as Tammy Alexander. Now, he is also believed to have falsely confessed to the 1980 slaying of Carol Cole in Louisiana, and she was identified until 2015. Now, Carol Cole was the case that I was looking up, and it was very, confusing, and it's, as I said, it's a cold case, it's unsolved, and there has been nobody arrested for it, and it remains open, and that's how I found that him. He was one of the ones that, he confessed to this, and he didn't really, of course, they could never, Now, he gets discredited. Now, this is very interesting how he gets discredited. Now, there's a journalist, Hugh Ainsworth, and others investigated the veracity of his claims for articles that appeared in the Dallas Times-Herald. Now, they had calculated that Lucas would have to have used his 13-year-old Ford station wagon to cover 11,000 miles. And in 1 month to have committed the crimes the police had attributed to him. So, after the story appeared in 1985 and revealed the flawed methods of the task force, the law enforcement opinion began to turn against the claims that the crimes had been solved. So now the bulk of the report, the Lucas report, was devoted to a detailed timeline of Lucas's murders. So they made up this timeline of the murders that Lucas is claiming to have committed. They report compared the claims to reliable and verifiable sources of his whereabouts, and the results were often contradicted his confessions. Thus, they cast doubt on most of the crimes in which he was implicated. So basically what they're saying is that he's confessed to these crimes, but yet he may not have committed all the crimes that he says he's done, if that is even possible. Now, the Attorney General wrote that when Lucas, and I'll quote, "When Lucas was confessing to hundreds of murders, those with custody of Lucas did nothing to bring an end to his hoax, and that we have found information that will lead us to believe that some officials clear cases just to get them off the books." So in other words, what they're saying is that once Lucas started confessing to all these crimes, the police just then decided, okay, we're just going to clear these cases. He's confessing to these, and we're just going to put it down as, he did this. No other suspects. He did it. Plain and simple. Which to me is kind of, it's kind of sad. I don't understand why. But then again, I guess because, these are all unsolved cases, and maybe they just want to get him off their desk, and they felt, okay, well, he's the one that's, confessing to this, so maybe he really did it. And then even though they probably already figured out and found out later, okay, he didn't do this, but, by this time, okay. So now, commutation of death sentence. Now, this is what I, as I said, he's murdered Deborah. He remained convicted of 11 crimes, and he's only been sentenced to death for one, which was identified as Orange Socks, which, as I said earlier, they later identified her as Deborah Jackson. And her body was found in Williamson County, Texas on Halloween 1979, despite a timesheet that recorded his presence at work in Jacksonville, Florida. So what I'm thinking is, and you guys can, kind of give your input on this. What I'm thinking is that, what did he do? Just, kind of somehow or another fix his timesheet and then, you know, go to Texas? I don't know. Now, Lucas was granted a stay on his death sentence after it was discovered that the details in his confession came from the case file, because which he had been given to read. So in other words, the confession, the case file, remember how I said earlier that the police or officials were giving him cases to read to basically see if he's the one that committed these, and if any of these look familiar. And he just took the information in like a sponge, and then he just started confessing to crimes that he didn't do. So the sentence was commuted to life in prison in 1998 by then Governor George W. Bush. And then in 2019, Orange Socks was officially identified as Deborah Jackson, who was 23 years old at the time of her death. And then eventually, in March of 2001, Lucas was found dead in prison from a heart failure at age 64. And his grave is unmarked due to vandalism and death. Now, there's differing opinions to all of this. And like I said, this is a kind of a weird case. Just because, and no, I don't just do serial killers. If you guys have cases that you would like me to look up, please let me know. Lucas's credibility had been damaged by his lack of precision. In other words, his confessions were inconsistent on some of the cases, but again, he initially admitted to having killed 60 people, a number that he raised to over 100, which police accepted, and then to a figure of 3,000 that led him to not being taken seriously. And he remained, however, America's most prolific murderer, despite denials such as flatly stating that he isn't a serial killer. And some continue to believe that he is responsible for a huge number of killings nonetheless. One of the investigators who interviewed Lucas several times concluded that Lucas had probably killed about 40 people. But such assertions were given little credence, with law enforcement the people that were in the law enforcement that was involved refusing to corroborate the claims. An experienced Texas Ranger, whom Ryan's team allowed access to Lucas, said that although it was obvious to him that Lucas had often lied about, there was an instance that he demonstrated guilty knowledge. And this is the Ranger quotes. The Ranger says, and I'll quote, "I remember him trying to cop to one that he didn't do. But there was another murder case where I'll kiss your butt if he didn't lead us right to the deer stand where the murder took place. Ain't no way he could have guessed that, and I damn sure didn't tell him. I think he did that one. So other rangers had similar experiences with Lucas, and the DNA evidence verified that Lucas did not kill 20 of his supposed victims. Now, there is a woman um, claiming to be Becky Powell, Lucas's girlfriend, who was one of his first confessed murders, turned out to be an adoring fan of Lucas. So even though, he killed her, or, killed, even though she, and I'm assuming Becky, and if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to go back and look, but I think, Freda is Becky's daughter. And okay, you're going to be a fan of somebody that, killed your child? I mean, seriously? There's something wrong with you. But, whatever. Now, there's been several books about this in the, on the case. There's been a couple of films that have been based on his confession. Confessions of a Serial Killer, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which Michael Rooker played in. Then Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Part 2. And then in 2009, Drifter, Henry Lee Lucas. Two documentary films that were released in 1995, and the serial killers, and a television documentary, Henry Lee Lucas, The Confession Killer. Now, I haven't seen this. I've seen this on Netflix, but I haven't watched it yet. 2019, Netflix released a 5-part serialized documentary, The Confession Killer, focusing on the far-reaching fallout of the investigation of Henry Lee Lucas. But my thing is, and I'm still trying to figure this out, is, you're probably going to sit here and say, Jennifer, you've come to the same conclusion that we have. Why would he confess to something that he didn't do? Why, that's what I'm trying to understand. I mean, even though, okay, granted, the police did, the authorities or whoever it was that basically, kind of gave him the information by letting him read the case files. To me, that makes no sense. But I'm just trying to understand why, he would cop to something that he didn't do, and then, still keep continuing to try to do it, even after, his confessions have kind of been, his claim, the confessions have kind of been discredited. It just, to me, makes no sense whatsoever. I just do not know. So, I'll leave you with that. We can figure that out later. So, anyway, guys, that's it for today. And I hope everyone has a great week. And thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.